Welcome to Bake to the Future. The wholesale baking industry mixes tradition and innovation to feed the world and the economy, generating some major dough while employing nearly 800,000 people in the U.S. We bring you a fresh take on the latest trends and issues impacting the baking sector through exclusive insights and conversations. Brought to you by the American Bakers Association, who will take you Bake to the Future.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Haley Blumenreich.
And I'm Katie Jewell. And on this special episode of Bake to the Future, focusing on the coronavirus, we're joined with a special guest host, Rob Mackey, ABA's president and CEO, and he'll be having a conversation with Cyril Follot, who's a global strategist for consumer foods with Rabobank. He focuses on baked goods, and he is no stranger to ABA and to the baking industry. And I'm really excited to have him on. And Haley, we've talked a lot about how Bake to the Future, while we are currently focusing on the coronavirus, we want to have still that forward-facing lens.
Right, and that's correct. And that's why Cyril is the perfect guest for this episode, because his whole job is to focus on the future, and we're excited to hear from him about what he sees up ahead, given our current crisis, and what we can expect for the future.
And that global perspective as well. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Rob and Cyril. But before I hand over the mic to Rob, Cyril, welcome.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
So our first question today, before Rob takes things away, is where are you joining us from today?
From my basement in Amsterdam, where I've been camping out for the last 4 weeks. But things are going well, I'm pleased to say.
Okay. All right. Well, Rob, why don't you give us a little bit of background on how you know Cyril, and then you can take it from there.
Sure. Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Katie. And Cyril, thank you so much for joining us. This is a real privilege for me. We've had the opportunity to work together many times over the last few years, and have really enjoyed the experience. I always come away better for the experience. I'm also really a big fan of your podcast that you put out on Consumer Foods to Go. I look forward to it every episode that it comes out because you always provide that real keen insight, not only about where we are today, but where the industry is going and sort of the broader dynamics at play. Interestingly enough, I was just reading the Rabobank Insider publication that you put out, and just filled with great insight about what a great year 2020 was going to be. And obviously now things have changed pretty dramatically. And so I think we're all in this process of recalibrating, our sights in terms of, responding to the immediate COVID crisis, but then also what does the world look like on the back end of this? So, Cyril, thank you very much for joining me. It's hard to believe. Just about a year ago, you and I were together at the AIBI conference in Manchester in the UK, having a very forward-looking conversation. But welcome.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. No, absolutely. The conversation there was very much about the future. And now we have to think about matters in sort of 3 time periods. How to fix things now immediately, also from a business point of view. What the end of the lockdown actually might look like, and how the economy gets going again, but it will be at a gradual pace. And then, what will the world look like in, let's say, 3 to 5 years from now? I think those would be the 3 time frames that at least I discuss with many of the Rabobank clients on this particular topic.
No, Cyril, and I think that's the vision, the viewpoint that we're looking for is what does the 3 to 5 year picture look like? Recognizing this is just another example that the world changes at such a rapid pace. Yeah. I'd like to dive in a little bit and talk about, at least here in the United States, we have bakers that are sort of falling into 3 fundamental categories. We have the retail-focused bakers that the predominant piece of their business is retail focused. We have sort of the blended where they have retail and food service. And then we have bakers that are almost exclusively focused on supplying the food service channel. I'm very curious to get your sense. One of the questions I'm hearing from our retail focused bakers is this uptick, it's more than an uptick, is this surge in demand, is that sustainable in your mind?
Yes, it is. So in the short term, it's pretty obvious because people, need to have lunch, for example. And so they don't go out to any food service operation because they're, in most cases closed. Takeaway occasionally is allowed, or drive-through in the US. Delivery is still possible. I must say, in other countries in the world, like Spain, almost nothing is possible anymore. So that is still an advantage for those that supply into food service. But then again, people need to buy lunch, and therefore the uptick in food retail is definitely there for as long as the lockdowns in certain states is happening.
No, and I think that's an excellent point, Cyril. And if you recall, a year ago when we were together, we were talking about this. We had just released 2 major thought leadership studies, and one of the common themes between the Power of Bakery study as well as the Millennial and Gen Z study was that emotional connection to bakery and bread. Yeah. I think we are seeing that playing out in real world, real time examples. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing we noted, which is very important, is during the hoarding, if I may call it that, when people started to buy the toilet rolls and all the shelf-stable products, there was also a move to products that people knew, that they're comfortable with. And bread, especially, bread in retail is something that's been there for forever. Well, not forever, but for a very, very long time. And people feel comfortable with that, so that's why they bought that. It's apart from just it's a psychology matter more than anything else. And in these times of crisis, especially this particular crisis, we expect consumers to look for comfort. And the bread category is definitely one of them that is going to gain from that, from that search for comfort. Apart from just the fact that food service is closed and people need to eat anyway, it is these products that I know this, I want this, I'll buy it.
No, that's fascinating. We have several food service outlets here in the Washington, Baltimore area, who were actually, if you were to order delivery or pickup, they would give you a roll of toilet paper. I thought it was fascinating marketing.
That is great. Yeah.
So, good. Kudos to them. So,
yeah. But what do you see, Rob, in the US within retail? Retail, there's the perimeter and there's the center aisle, and in the perimeter, you see a lot of in-store baking, more frozen products that are thaw and serve or in-store baking. Do you see any difference between those two categories? So in-store baking versus the center aisle, the packaged products.
So I'm so glad you brought that up, Cyril, because I think the initial assumption was that if it was in retail, sales were up 2 and 3 times what they typically would be, and I think in reality, the center store packaged product is clearly up, those large numbers as we talked about. At least here in the United States, in most parts of the United States, a lot of that perimeter bakery, which is sort of a bulk, the consumer goes and pulls it and puts it in a bag and they do the packaging themselves. Yeah. Most of those operations, frankly, have been closed up. And I can tell that from experience in our area. So again, those bakers that are serving that, of which many of which are our members, are serving that segment, the in-store bakery side, are really feeling quite a bit of pressure right now.
Yeah. Now we are hearing the same things on a global scale, where retailers find it difficult to find personnel to man basically the in-store bakery sections. The other interesting anecdote, and I'm not sure this is the same in the US, but in Europe you find that distribution centers of retailers, the freezing capacity is limited, and they're now stocking up on frozen veg, frozen meat, frozen pizzas. And on the bottom of the list, unfortunately, is frozen bakery, because it's not as important as the other products that I just mentioned. So some of the storage space is being sort of, traded away to other product categories, which is not helping the frozen category at all.
No, that's an excellent point. And the interesting thing is, on the other side, from the baker's perspective, for our members that are in the frozen dough or the frozen finished product, for retail and even for food service is they're desperate for additional storage capacity. We've helped several members. We have a great relationship with the association that represents the cold storage chain, and we have been working with them to sort of match up capacity. But even they will tell you that capacity is very limited right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about the food service side. And I think, again, we have some limited outlets that are open. And I think there's a lot of concern, depending on how long this continues, is what does that look like on the back end? I mean, in your senses, are people going to rush back? I know we've all been cooped up in our homes, some with our children or parents. Are we all going to rush back out into the market, or are we going to see segments of that? So maybe, QSR continue to focus on the ability to sort of grab and bring home. What's your sense of where that might be on the back end of this, Cyril?
Yes. So let's focus on the sort of the immediate release or end of the lockdowns. Where people are allowed to travel more frequently and the food service operators start to reopen again. So initially, we looked at what happened in China in when SARS ended. SARS was also a respiratory disease a decade ago. And what happened there is that when people, when it was over and restaurants opened again, there was more than a makeup of the lost sales in the period than when they had to close because of SARS. So it was a fantastic time for restaurants. However, what we see from China right now, and this is probably going to happen throughout the world, many of the restaurants of the food service providers that have opened are selling at about 50% of what they did pre-crisis. 50%.
Wow.
Because consumers, they don't dare to come in. I think fear for, a virus or perhaps even the unknown. And I talked about comfort before. But the fear is just big and will remain to be there for a while. So especially consumers in China are not going back to restaurants. When everybody is a consumer, but workers, they're going back to work. So they may have to get their lunches at restaurants. So there is traffic. But the traffic on average is roughly half of what it was pre-crisis. It's gradually getting better. But people are still scared to get there. So that is one part of it, consumer behavior. The other part of it is what governments are going to prescribe in terms of, social distancing, whether actually there's an structural 8 feet measure or whatever the measure will be, that people need to distance themselves from each other. For many food operators or food service operators, it will be very difficult to maintain that or to open that or to find a way there. So many of the things that we're seeing happening right now will continue for a while, like drive-through being very successful and delivery to a degree being successful. I'm sure that will continue for longer and perhaps even till the moment that there's a proper vaccination programs or another type of medication that can control the disease.
I think it's fascinating. We're in the lockdown now here in the United States, and again, we're a little different in that we still have half dozen states that have not implemented a stay-at-home order, and even the different orders vary state to state, even region by region. One of the things that we're hearing from our members is, there is a delivery option, there is the takeout option is still viable, but even there, in the middle of the pandemic, business is down between 50 and 80%, again, depending on the variables. Yep. So when you're saying in China, and again, that's one market, if that's back to 50%, then I think if our baseline is a little higher than maybe theirs might be, maybe that's a glimmer of hope, on the upside as we go through this. But let me explore with you, and I've talked to a number of bakers, about some of these, the delivery apps, the Uber Eats, the DoorDash, Grubhub, and all of that. Is that something that the bakers should be thinking more about, in terms of outreach, communication, working with their food service partners, whether they're a QSR chain or a local sub shop? Is that an area for opportunity?
Absolutely. and direct to consumer may not be straightforward. And already in the last 2 weeks, I had numerous discussions with bakers, industrial bakers, to help them think through what they can do in direct to consumer delivery. But the challenge is just the size of the price. Basically, bread is not that expensive, or baked goods are not that expensive, so the delivery costs are just way too high. But there may be opportunities in providing frozen goods or frozen baked goods to consumers directly, but especially working with the restaurants or working with those delivery companies to have the delivery to the home. I think that there's definitely an opportunity there. Apart from the Amazon being able to deliver, which could be another platform, by the way, to use here. Deliveroo in the UK, as an example, they no longer only sell or distribute hot meals, but they also start now to ship essentials from a supermarket chain called Morrison's. So 70 essentials they can bring to your home, which includes bread. So there's different opportunities to, but you need to think creatively. But there's different opportunities to work with these platforms to bring to your consumer. And initially, you may not make any money on that, but that's not the point. The point is to be out there and to connect with your end consumer, because that is very important. What we've seen in this environment.
That's fascinating, Cyril, because that was one of the findings in the two studies that I referenced earlier that we released in 2019. But it was the thinking was, how do you position your brand, if you will, regardless of the stream, and take advantage and go directly to consumer, because you got to build up that brand loyalty. And one of the themes we have been sort of hitting on off and on through this, the whole COVID thing is, are we seeing an acceleration of trends that were already in play, particularly in the e-commerce and the delivery options? Yes. And what I'm hearing you say is absolutely yes.
Yeah. This will accelerate from here. And apart from being close to the ABA, I'm also very close to the ARBI, the organization you referenced before, the European Bakery Association. And they've done, in the last couple of weeks, they've done a lot of work working with their members to help educate them on how to act better with retailers. And you gave a few examples here already, but what else can you do for your members right now, Rob?
Well, I think we've been in, and I hate to use this analogy because, we have health professionals who are literally on the front line, but we've been in triage mode probably the last 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. And what I mean by that is we have been, trying to interface with government agencies to get declarations of critical infrastructure through. We've been trying to get protocols to make sure that our members are able to have information on how they protect their skilled employees, to keep them, coming to work and motivated to come to work, moving government regulation out of the way, and all of those things. And then, frankly, honestly, Cyril, we have done a lot of one-on-one. We'll have a member who will call us. A great example, a couple of weeks ago, we had 2 members that called us where their route sales representatives were getting nervous because as a DSD business, they were required to deliver into retail outlets during business hours. So during the hoarding that was going on, there was a lot of very unsafe, unhealthy interchanges in grocery stores. And we were able to then reach out to our partners at the Food Marketing Institute and the National Grocers Association, who very quickly, within hours, got word out to their members. Let's move those delivery service windows into non-business hours. So that's just an example. We talked about finding frozen storage. So we've been in triage mode up until I would say a couple of days ago, and now we're shifting a little bit into how do we help members connect with other potential sales outlets? How do we help members that may need capacity with those members that have capacity? But it's not easy. As you know, the retail supply chain is vastly different than the food service supply chain.
Absolutely.
But one of the things on that I'll just mention is we went to FDA and said, we've got some inventory, we've got some capacity on the food service side, but because of the labeling requirements and the UPC codes and some of those things that are required on the retail side, we need some flexibility from FDA in particular in terms of how do you label that product. But then also we're working with retailers, again, FMI and NGA, how do we create a UPC code for a product that's never had one before?
Yeah, yes.
And then I think, and then the other big thing, frankly, that we will be honed in on pretty exclusively through the end of this is making sure that our members can stay operational and the entire supply chain, whether it's ingredient suppliers or equipment maintenance and things like that, to the production floor, to distribution and getting it into retail. And there's a lot of anxiety, which we completely understand, in the industry amongst the skilled employees. And so it's really important. And I think our members are doing a fantastic job of motivating their employees. And I know of one in particular that is even still going down on the plant floor, wearing all the personal protective equipment and safe distancing and all of that, because he feels it's really important to be visible and that management at the top level is visible, to motivate. We've worked with the Vice President's office, issued a great video thanking all of that entire supply chain employees. We cut a video ourselves earlier this week. So a lot of that is how do we keep them motivated? And then on the backside is we're working with our food industry colleagues on a proposal that would treat our frontline employees, and it's only the frontline employees, similar to the way enlisted men and women who serve during wartime in combat zones, where they get a lot of their taxes waived, particularly some of the payroll taxes waived, because that incentivizes them, to continue to come, to continue to feed the country. But it also provides some added, financial reward, if you will, for that. And so we'll be pushing very hard with Congress on that in the next couple of weeks.
Yes. You mentioned something that triggered a lot with me, because I'm surprised how well things are going, actually. But have you heard about any disruptions in the supply chain towards the bakeries? Because we've talked a lot about from bakeries to food service and food retail. But, getting the commodities or the trucking or the other types of logistics. Do you hear of any? Because I think actually in most countries, and also the US, things are going fantastically smoothly given the incredibly difficult circumstances everybody has to operate in.
Cyril, I'm so glad you mentioned that because I completely agree with you. And let me just be really clear. It is far from flawless. It is far from optimal. But what I'm really impressed with is how the entire food supply chain has, and we know, it's sort of in the background and even in the industry, I think sometimes you might take it for granted. But I just think it's just amazing to me that we're still getting truck and carloads of flour. And in particularly, 2 and 3 times higher the volume. You're still getting the packaging and the yeast. I think one of the personally frustrating items is this pervasive story that's being driven by social media. And we've done a number of interviews on this, which is really focused at the home baker market, where folks are not seeing the 1 pound bag of flour. They're not seeing the dry yeast. And there's this whole thing going on in the United States called stress baking, which I think is great. Families baking together is always a great thing. But unfortunately, people are posting on social media, empty shelves. And, we all know the reasons why. That's such a small piece of the overall business. And it's just taken a little while. But, I was in my grocery store just the other day and the flour was back and it looked like there was some yeast coming back. So but the resiliency of the supply chain has been, I think, one of the untold success stories. We've had, we've heard reports, again, we talked about the frozen storage. Early on, there were states that were locking down, truck stops and rest areas, and requiring vehicles to pull off to the side of the road as part of the initial lockdown and process. And so we were able to work with, again, both federal and state agencies to reopen some of those things. So again, it's been surprisingly resilient, and our hope is, and if what we were talking about earlier, where we are compared to where Europe is, where we might be a few weeks behind and we might be able to start to open up, I think it's just going to make it easier.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Good. So speaking of, sort of the U.S. and European, and you talked about what the European bakers are working on, how would you, from your vantage point, how would you compare kind of the response between, is it very similar, or, are there some key differences? And more importantly, are there some key learnings between the European side and the U.S. side, if you will, in terms of how to respond for the baking and food industry?
Yeah, well, the one key difference, of course, is that more food service was closed over here. It's basically everything, apart from some takeaway in some countries and delivery in some countries. So especially the industrial bakers that produce frozen products are under tremendous amount of stress. And they've been working incredibly hard to, try and reroute as much of the production into food retail. But that's not always possible, because you need to get that listing with food retail. So that is, and frozen bakery is slightly more bigger, let's put it that way, relatively at least, to fresh bread compared to the US. So it's a very important, and for many companies, stressful period in that sense to get that right. On the labor side of things, we in Europe are in the fortunate position that almost all governments have decided to, in one way or another, fund the layoffs or the temporary layoffs. So many people are, in the UK they call it furlough. In Belgium they call it technical unemployment. But most of the workers are still being paid, or at least paid 80% of what they used to make. So in that sense, it's easy for the bakers to operate in this environment and to ask people to not to come in, but also to basically guarantee that when things are getting back to normal, that they will have their job, which I think is a fantastic thing to do. But in general, the response is, do whatever you can. I know that the industrial fresh bakers here, and it's the same in the US, but also here in Europe, were working 24/7 just to get stuff on the shelves. And the one thing that I've learned is that, I talked a lot about flexibility in production processes, and many of them were saying, we are incredibly flexible. And actually they are, because many decided, okay, we are going to focus on 2 or 3 SKUs and produce as much tonnage or volume as we can, because that's what the consumer needs, that's what the retailer currently needs. So the adaptability, the flexibility to the new situation, I found almost inspiring. Well, it is inspiring to see how quickly they were able to do that, and to make sure that there was sufficient supply of products on the shelves. It wasn't for all categories. The bakery sector did quite well, I must say, in the initial days of hoarding.
No, I think, Cyril, I think that is a big similarity, is the way the bakers adapted and adjusted, within hours of this. And we, I was talking to a number of bakers in that early period, and they were saying the same thing. You're not going to see the niche product on the shelf, because we're going to go to the 80% volume that drives it, and it's really about those essential products and all of that. And I think, as time goes on, you'll see more of the sort of the niche products. But I think it's just been absolutely impressive and very inspiring to see the way this industry both, and I think it's happening all over the world, where the baking industry is as a big part of the food industry, is just sort of stepping into the breach. I've had so many people outside of the industry say, what a calming influence it was to go in and know that there was going to be, bread and rolls and, some basic bakery product, including indulgent. I think, I haven't seen data yet, it's probably too early, but I think people are saying, I'm going to have that brownie, or I'm going to have that snack cake, just because it makes me feel good, and I'll worry about, if there are any consequences. And I think, that's just critically important. And again, I haven't seen data. It's probably too early to see data. in terms of what that means. But
no, but we've seen some comfort eating, comfort buying.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, so and I fully understand that. We are wondering, and we are indeed waiting for data as well, whether it will offset the losses because it wasn't sold in food service, as in the indulgent products not being sold in food service. We hope it has. I'm slightly doubtful, but there's been an interesting uptick of indulgent products in food retail. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. Again, I want to go back to that 3 to 5 year time frame before we wrap up, Cyril. The best analogy, and I admit it's a flawed analogy. The best analogy that I have is the 2008 and 2009 recession. And it was fascinating to me is right before that, the ratio of meals consumed in the home versus out of the home, it, for the first time tilted to out of the home.
Yes.
Then we go into the recession and people are obviously eating at home more. And so it sort of flipped back. And it was just recently, if I'm not mistaken, where it kind of came back to the pre-recession levels. Do you think, what's your sense of as we come out of this, how is that ratio going to play out? What's the consumer confidence level going to be? Just trying to get a sense of what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, this is. I'd like to split that in two parts. One is the economy, and the other part is behavior, because we are going to see a behavioral shift. But I'll talk to that later on. Let's start with the recession. For the US, we in Rabobank expect at least -6 dip this year, and a recovery of probably around 6% next year. Which feels a bit V-shaped and it is somewhere between V and U. I think that's, by the way, a very important discussion that will happen over the next few weeks. What sort of the profile of the bounce back will look like. We are somewhere between U and V at this point in time, but that may change because the longer this lockdown takes, the worse it will get for many people that are employed and the impact on the economy. So all the stimulus that are out there, I think actually by many governments, including in the US, I think is a very good idea to keep the economies going for a while until we're back on our feet ourselves. But we will enter a period of low economic growth or lower economic growth. And then from an economic point of view, probably the same will happen as you flagged in 2008, 2009. But the key difference that it may not be as prolonged as it was at that point in time. But you will see trading down from high-end restaurants to other types of restaurants. Perhaps quick service restaurants might actually do better for a short period in time. Because of this, you will see a move back to food retail from food service, without a shadow of a doubt. But initially, perhaps where people would spend their money in food service, they buy some nice indulgent products in food retail. That's what you usually see at the start of a recession, and then people start to trade down within food retail. So there may be an opportunity also again for especially within the branded package space. For the private label area. That's an area what did extremely well in the 2008-2009 timeframe, because it's cheaper and still reasonable to good quality actually. So that is something that you might expect as well. I don't expect any other type from an economic point of view, different type of behaviors. This is just regular economics, what happens during a normal recession. I think my main point on this one again is we need to be very mindful of the shape of the recession. As I said, we are somewhere between U and V. If that turns into U or even L, then many of the scenarios can go out of the door, and we are in a new reality.
Wouldn't you say the analogy that I've used is the shorter the valley, the duration of the valley, the sharper the V uptick
Absolutely.
Is going to be.
Yeah.
I think you make a really good point. Whether it's in Europe or here in the United States, we just passed the largest stimulus, whatever you want to call it, package, in our history, over $2 trillion, excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm speaking in 80s terms, $2 trillion. But a big chunk of that is something called the Paycheck Protection Act. And I think our leaders are saying, okay, if we can keep certainly not ideal, not at full levels, but if we can keep a bulk of the economy capitalized, and families capitalized, that if we get through this in a quicker period of time, that then there will be in position the opportunity for consumers to come back into the marketplace. Yeah. And I think it's anybody's guess, I think, in terms of where they will position. And I think there'll be time to figure that out as we go forward. But I think I think the concern I've got and what we have voiced, to our contacts at the White House and on Capitol Hill, and this is, I think, really important. Everybody's in the zone. So we've asked two things. They need to put together the recovery task force now, if they haven't already, and they should be focused on getting the economy roaring back, because I think one of the lessons after 2009 is we had this anemic growth, 1.2%, and all of the tools that we used to get out of that, we just barely got back in the toolbox in the last 18 months, and so. That's probably going to mean setting aside, some philosophical differences and all of that. But essentially, there's two things that happen. You got to take government out of the way. And then what you have to do is allow companies to have as much capital on hand. And the way to do that is to reduce taxes again. This is not a partisan statement, but they've got to. Our government leaders have got to get the economy roaring back. Anemic growth is not going to cut it. That gets into the L that you were talking about. Yes. And so, my hope is, that is being listened to by, and I'm one of a large number of voices, and they're frankly far more, smarter people than I that are making that argument. But I think that will be the key to where we are, say, a year from now, 3 years from now, and 5 years from now.
And I want to interject here. We're talking about the 1, 3, 5 year kind of trajectory and what we're looking at. And Cyril, I want you to put your futurist hat on here for a second, and let's think blue sky. Let's think crazy. I know at the last IBIE and I've seen news reports and just kind of these futurist leanings where we're talking about grocery delivery and restaurant delivery from drones. If we look 3 to 5 years, that contactless delivery, is that the type of stuff we're talking about when we're saying, we're taking these ideas and just progressing them further? What are some ideas that you think could actually become a reality?
Digitization will definitely accelerate from here, but especially on the consumer side of things. You talk in your example about robotization, and that remains to be seen. It may happen because I mentioned fear a few times, and if people continue to have fears, which depends, by the way, on how quickly the virus moves away. Almost sociology, no longer economy here, in terms of the studies. But so that may be an opportunity for robotization if this lingers for longer. If it is only short-lived, then I think the people are now getting used to using apps for delivery. People are using Amazon even more, but also now for food, which happened not so much in the past, or Instacart or any of those type of delivery services, apart from the ones that were mentioned before in this call, in this podcast. So that will definitely, we will see an acceleration there. But in terms of other deltas, the one that I've been thinking about a lot is travel. I've been doing Zoom, BlueJeans, WebEx, GoTo, Hangouts, Teams, Skype. I don't know how many. I want to mention them all, but I don't know how many type of video meetings in the last 2-3 weeks. And working from home might just become the new norm, which has a big impact on commuting and the way people travel and all that. I'm sure that going to a workplace is still important also from a social point of view, and face-to-face interaction is indeed very important. But what if people start to work from home much more than they did before? It will have an impact on, office catering, going out for lunch, getting your sandwich for lunch, or eating at home for that matter. So some of the trends that we've talked about before, as in eating more sandwiches or more fresh bread at home, may actually persist for a while because of people working from home much more. Travel, business travel especially, I think we might see a big change from here, business-related travel, which has an impact on the food sector in general and the bakery sector in particular quite a bit. So I think that is one that I would like to highlight. The other one, which may be contentious to a bit, but I do believe that the bakery sector is actually incredibly well positioned for it, is nutrition. The preliminary statistics, and I don't necessarily want to say that the academia is saying this because that the full research hasn't been done yet, but in many European countries it has been talked about a lot that the people on ICUs with the virus tend to be obese or at least overweight. I think in the Dutch environment where I live, 80% of the people in ICU are overweight or obese. So I'm wondering whether the alarm bells will go off with either the consumer or, for that matter, with governments that there's a weight issue and there's a general health crisis which might be accelerated by this virus, and that governments or especially consumers are going to take action and going to take even more care of themselves than they did before. In the short term now, you see a lot of people buying immunity boosters and vitamin C's, and there's a lot of apparently I'm hearing that people are buying bananas right now and oranges. But I think the bakery sector, also from a slightly more longer point of view, can definitely help, for example, with gut health. Because there's a clear link between gut health and mental health. So so if there's adding fiber or adding other ingredients that will feel people better and also make them more able to control their weight or just be more healthy in general, I think there's a big opportunity there. So that is, my advice to anyone listening here is try to focus on that, because either governments, but especially a big part of the population will put their health more on the agenda than they did before the crisis.
Cyril, I want to jump in on that. That is an excellent point that frankly I hadn't thought a whole lot about. And we worked with the Grain Foods Foundation about a year ago and commissioned research to look at the impact of grains, whole and enriched grains. Yes. And one of the findings that came out of that, and again, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, I don't know where that is in terms of a peer-reviewed published journal yet, but one of the findings that I thought was really stark is diets that are, high in both enriched and whole grains are great contributors to just sort of overall health and reducing chronic illnesses and diseases. And again, I think you're right, a lot more research. That is a great opportunity, I think, for bakers to really take forward.
Yeah. So let's. And I'm sure that the ABA and the associated associations will try and promote this as long as there's scientific proof, of course. But I think there's definitely an opportunity for the industry as a whole to send out a message to consumers. We all know that bread is good for you, but it may help you stay healthier for longer. I think that would be a great message to send out.
That's great. Cyril, I think that is a great place to wrap up. Thank you so much. It was great to get up early with you and have my coffee with you this morning, and really appreciate you joining us. I hope you and your family stay healthy. And I think we all hope that we are all, on the back end of this very soon. So thank you for joining us.
No, thank you, ABA and Rob, Katie, and Haley for having me on this podcast. It's always fun to do. So, and I hope to have provided some insights from across the globe that your audience perhaps can work with or think about at least.
Terrific. Katie or Haley, do you want to close us out?
I think that about does it. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Cyril and Rob for a very interesting conversation.
And be sure to, if you're listening to this podcast, to also listen to Cyril's podcast, Consumer Food to Go, and to also go to our website, baketothefuture.org, where you can see this episode and others. You can also leave us a voicemail right there that gives us more ideas or gives some thoughts that might even get played on the show.
Bake to the Future is brought to you by the American Bakers Association in partnership with Human Factor. To hear upcoming and past episodes, go to baketothefuture.org. Bake to the Future is produced by Haley Blumenreich. Audio engineer is Blake Althen. and a slice of the action is written by the American Bakers Association's Government Relations team.